The announcement echoed through the first-class cabin, breaking the tense silence. This flight will be delayed due to a security issue that requires immediate attention. Barron Trump remained composed, yet he could feel the weight of the threat aimed squarely at him. The front door swung open, and two security officers entered with stern expressions. They stopped directly in front of him, demanding that he leave his seat without providing any clear explanation. The eyes of the other passengers turned toward Barron, their silent gazes adding to the oppressive atmosphere in the cabin. "Sir," one of the officers addressed him, his tone polite but firm, "we need you to come with us." Barron rose, meeting the probing stares and undercurrents of hostility from those around him. Through the frosted cockpit window he caught a glimpse of the pilot pacing, as if waiting for Barron's compliance. But Barron knew that this time retreat was not an option. This moment was more than a confrontation between one man and injustice. It was a powerful reminder of the importance of courage in the face of adversity. If you are curious to see how Barron will navigate this challenge, stay tuned. The story begins. Barron Trump sat silently in the luxurious first-class cabin, his gaze fixed out the window as the setting sun bathed the runway in a golden hue. The chatter of boarding passengers filled the air, but Barron barely noticed, his mind far away. Suddenly, a harsh voice shattered the silence. "Excuse me? What's he doing here?" The pilot's tone was sharp, cutting through the calm like a blade. His eyes were locked on Barron. Passengers froze, their eyes darting between the pilot and the young man. A voice somewhere in the quiet cabin spoke. Barron looked up, his expression confused but still composed. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, his voice calm, though the tension was palpable. The pilot smirked. "Oh, there's a problem. People like you don't belong here. This is first class, not a charity flight." A collective sigh rippled through the cabin. Barron's heart tightened, but not for himself. He'd faced criticism all his life. What struck him was the hatred in the pilot's eyes. It wasn't about his seat. It was something deeper, uglier. Passengers began whispering, some pulling out their phones to record. An elderly woman sitting nearby leaned toward Barron, whispering, "Are you okay, young man?" Barron nodded, offering a polite smile, but the pilot wasn't finished. He stepped forward, pointing at Barron like a judge delivering a verdict. "I don't care who you are. You don't belong here. Either move or I'll have someone remove you from this flight." At that moment, Barron's calm demeanor shifted. He slowly stood, his tall frame drawing all eyes to him. The whispers stopped. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but firm, "I have a ticket for this seat. I belong here just like anyone else. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue enjoying my flight." The pilot sneered, folding his arms. "We'll see who wins," he muttered before striding toward the cockpit, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The passengers felt uneasy, but no one dared intervene. Barron sat back down, his hands resting lightly on the armrests, not with anger, but with contemplation. Something in the pilot's hostility made it impossible for him to ignore, and he wouldn't let it slide. Unseen by many, a storm was brewing inside him, not just in the skies, but in the hearts of those witnessing this confrontation. What was about to happen would make them reconsider everything they thought they knew. Time passed, but the tension remained like a storm cloud, hanging over the cabin. The pilot had not returned, but his words lingered in the air. Barron noticed the concerned glances of the passengers. Some sympathized, others hesitated, unsure how to respond. A young flight attendant, her face worried, approached Barron cautiously. "Sir," she said softly, bowing her head slightly, "are you all right? I heard what the pilot said. If you'd like, I can arrange for you to be moved." Barron looked at her for a moment, his face unreadable, then replied gently, "Thank you, but I'm not going anywhere. I have the right to sit here." She nodded, a fleeting look of admiration passing through her eyes, but worry still clouded her expression. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, then hurriedly turned and walked down the aisle. Then, something unexpected happened. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we will be delayed. We need to address a security concern." Barron froze. A security concern. The pilot's previously hostile tone suddenly seemed to make sense. He wasn't just rude. He was trying to turn Barron into a threat, a calculated move to justify his actions. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin, growing louder as speculation spread. A man sitting across the aisle leaned forward. "Is he talking about you?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity and unease. Barron didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. If things escalated, he wanted to make sure there was a record. At that moment, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. The whispers morphed into clearer murmurs. Barron watched as they walked down the aisle, their eyes scanning the passengers. They stopped in front of him. "Sir," one of them spoke, his voice professional yet firm, "we need you to come with us." Barron's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He stood calmly, his tall frame causing the security officers to hesitate for a moment. "May I ask why?" he asked, his voice even. "We've received information about a potential issue," one of the officers responded vaguely. At this, the passengers fell silent. Their eyes shifted between Barron and the security officers, some showing anger, others frozen in shock. But then a voice broke the silence. "This is ridiculous." It was the elderly woman who had spoken to Barron earlier. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "He hasn't done anything wrong. I saw everything. It's the pilot who's in the wrong." Her protest seemed to galvanize others. A man in a suit stood up. "Exactly. I've been sitting here the whole time, and he's just been minding his own business." The security officers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the scenario they had anticipated. One of them spoke into the radio, likely trying to figure out how to handle the escalating tension. Barron remained calm, but inside, he was taken aback. Not because of the confrontation, he was used to being targeted, but because of the people standing up for him, strangers with no obligation to him, refusing to stay silent. But the pilot still hadn't shown his full hand. Whatever happened next, it was clear this wasn't just about Barron. It was something much bigger, and the truth was about to come to light. As the confrontation continued, the tension in the cabin reached its peak. The security officers hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the passengers' strong support for Barron. One of them turned away, speaking into the radio, while the other seemed uncomfortable under the barrage of stares focused on him. Meanwhile, Barron stood firm, his composure a stark contrast to the chaos around him. The elderly woman who had defended him earlier didn't stop. She stepped closer, her voice resolute. "I don't care who you are. This young man has been polite and silent the entire flight. If anyone should be removed from the plane, it's the pilot." Her words rang out like thunder. The murmurs grew louder, and the passengers began to speak up, their voices filled with outrage. "She's right," a passenger shouted. "We've all seen what's been going on." At that moment, the pilot reappeared, his face flushed with fury. "Enough!" he yelled, his voice sharp as a blade, cutting through the commotion. He pointed directly at Barron, his hand trembling with rage. "I don't care what these people are saying. This flight won't take off until he's off this plane." Barron turned to face him, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Then why is that?" he asked calmly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is it because of something I've done, or because of what you think I am?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with meaning. The pilot hesitated for a moment, but his expression soon hardened. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "You can fool all of them, but I can spot a troublemaker when I see one." The cabin erupted in shouts. Passengers yelled, some calling for the pilot to be removed, others demanding answers. The security officers looked flustered, unsure of how to regain control. Then, an older man from the back of the cabin stood up. His face, weathered with age and experience, radiated authority. "Enough! This is absurd!" His deep, commanding voice silenced the room. All eyes turned toward him. "I recognize that young man," he continued, pointing to Barron, "and I think all of you do as well. That's Barron Trump, son of the former President of the United States." A collective sigh spread through the cabin. Barron felt a wave of unease wash over him as the truth was revealed. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, but he had hoped to avoid the attention, to live quietly without the weight of that name following him everywhere. The pilot's face contorted into a sneer. "So what?" he snarled. "That doesn't give him the right to act like this." "The right to act?" the elderly man shot back, his voice unwavering. "The only one acting like they have a right here is you. I don't care who he is or isn't. Your behavior is unacceptable." The security officers seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. One of them stepped forward, addressing the pilot directly. "Sir, we need to de-escalate this situation," he said, his tone serious. "If you continue to provoke the passengers, we may have to ask you to leave the plane." The pilot's face hardened, but before he could respond, another voice cut through. This time, it was Barron. "I think we've had enough drama for one flight," he said, his voice calm but firm. "If you want me to leave, I'll go. But remember, everything has been recorded, and I won't let your actions go unchallenged." The pilot's expression faltered. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder again. Passengers began to pull out their phones, some openly recording the confrontation. In that moment, it felt like the whole plane was holding its breath. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the security officers turned to Barron and spoke. "You don't need to go anywhere, sir. Please, take your seat." The cabin erupted in applause, but Barron remained still. Something inside him told him this wasn't over yet. The pilot's eyes narrowed, anger flaring up. Barron could feel it in the air. The pilot was about to make a final, desperate move. The pilot's fury swelled, his face turning beet red as he slammed his fist against the cabin wall. "This is my plane!" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "I decide who stays and who goes!" The applause quickly turned into gasps of disbelief. Passengers began murmuring, the disdain for the pilot spreading like wildfire. The elderly man stood again, raising his hand for silence. "My plane?" he said, his voice cold but sharp. "Last I checked, this plane belongs to the airline, not your ego. You're supposed to be a professional, but all I see is a power-hungry individual trying to humiliate someone who's done nothing wrong." His words landed like a slap to the face, causing the pilot to take a step back, momentarily stunned. But the silence didn't last long. "This isn't about power," the pilot barked, his voice filled with venom. "This is about rules, and I'm the one who enforces them." "Rules?" Barron interrupted, his tone firm but still calm. "What rule have I broken? Tell everyone what I've done to deserve this treatment." The pilot hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty as he scanned the cabin. The truth was, he didn't have a valid answer. His actions were fueled by personal bias, and now, under the public scrutiny, he struggled to find a way out. One of the security officers stepped forward, addressing the pilot directly. "Sir, you need to calm down," he said, his voice cold but professional. "You're causing a disturbance, and our job is to ensure the safety of all passengers aboard." The pilot's face twisted in disbelief. "Are you taking his side?" he spat, his tone dripping with malice. "We're standing on the side of what's right," the officer replied, his voice unwavering. "And right now, you're the one jeopardizing this flight." The cabin erupted in applause, the support for Barron growing stronger with each passing moment. The pilot, clearly overwhelmed by the majority, scanned the room, desperately searching for support. But no one spoke up. Even the flight attendants, who had been silent before, exchanged worried glances. One of them stepped forward. "Captain," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret, "I think it's best you step down. This situation has gone beyond what's acceptable." The pilot's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed like he might explode again. But something in his eyes shifted, perhaps the realization that he had lost control, or the weight of the passenger's judgment bearing down on him. Whatever it was, he finally stepped back. "Fine," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "Let him stay, but this isn't over." With that, the pilot stormed off, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Barron exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders lift for the first time since this all began. He turned to face the passengers, offering a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," he said simply. The elderly woman who had defended him earlier gently patted his arm. "You didn't deserve this," she said warmly. Don't worry, we'll make sure the world knows what really happened here. Barron nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. But as he settled back into his seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that the pilot's threatening words were more than just empty threats. Something told him this battle wasn't over, and as the plane began its ascent, Barron couldn't help but wonder, what would the pilot's next move be? And how would it affect not just him, but everyone aboard? The plane climbed smoothly, and the atmosphere in the cabin gradually began to settle. Passengers exchanged relieved glances, some offering reassuring smiles to Barron. Despite the calm exterior, a sense of unease lingered beneath the surface. The pilot's final words echoed in Barron's mind like a constant warning bell. The flight attendants moved down the aisles, distributing drinks and snacks, their professionalism masking the storm that had just passed. Barron took his glass of water, his fingers lightly brushing the cup as he tried to focus on the present moment. Across from him, the elderly man who had defended him from the start raised his glass in a quiet, unspoken gesture of solidarity. "Stay strong," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had weathered many storms. "Bullies like him thrive on fear, but today you've shown courage." Barron nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you," he replied. "I just hope this ends here." But it wasn't over. About 20 minutes into the flight, a small noise came from the cockpit, tightening the already tense atmosphere in the cabin. The flight attendants exchanged quick glances, their faces betraying a momentary flicker of concern. One of them disappeared behind the cockpit door, leaving the others to hurriedly reassure the passengers that everything was fine. Then, suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice rang out, filled with barely contained rage, intensifying the tension. "I want to apologize for the incident earlier," he continued, his tone dripping with insincerity. "But let me remind everyone, there are rules for a reason. Some people think they can stand above them, but they don't have that right." Passengers exchanged uneasy looks, the vague threat aimed at Barron hanging in the air, making the atmosphere even heavier. But Barron remained composed, his gaze fixed straight ahead, unwavering. The intercom fell silent, but the unease lingered. Moments later, the plane jolted, sending a wave of anxious breaths through the cabin. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her face pale. She tried to calm the passengers. "It's just a little turbulence," she said, attempting a smile, but the worry in her eyes couldn't be masked. But Barron didn't buy it. Something in his gut told him that something was seriously wrong. And then, through the frosted glass of the cockpit door, he saw the pilot's shadow moving back and forth, pacing like a caged animal. The elderly man sitting next to Barron leaned in, his voice low, just loud enough for Barron to hear. "That man has lost his mind. He's not done. You need to be ready for whatever happens next." Barron's heart raced. He nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. He had faced public scrutiny, endured criticism, and been treated unjustly before. But this was different. This wasn't just about his reputation. It was a matter of safety. The plane continued its smooth course, but the atmosphere in the cabin had grown stifling. Then, suddenly, as if to signal something, the cockpit door slammed open, hitting the wall. The pilot stood there, his eyes wild, breath ragged. "All right," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If no one does anything, then I will." Before anyone could react, the pilot lunged toward Barron, his gaze fixed on him. The gasps and cries of the passengers filled the air, but no one dared move. The tension reached its peak as the pilot stood right above Barron, his face twisted in fury. "You think you're untouchable?" the pilot sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Think again." Just as the pilot took another step forward, the elderly man who had defended Barron sprang to his feet, stepping between him and the pilot. His voice rang out with power and unwavering resolve. "You've crossed the line," he said. The entire cabin fell into silence, the eyes of all the passengers trained on the two men, one representing a frenzied abuse of power, the other a quiet hero standing for what was right. What happened next would not only shape the rest of the flight, but would also leave an indelible mark in the minds of everyone aboard. The tension was higher than ever, and Barron understood that this was no longer just his fight. This was a battle against injustice, no matter the cost. The cabin seemed to hold its breath as the passengers watched the unfolding confrontation. The pilot's fury seemed ready to explode, but the elderly man's unwavering stare brought a flicker of hope to the cabin. "You've gone too far," the elderly man said, his tone calm yet resolute. "Sit down and do your job, or I'll make sure you never fly again." The pilot curled his lip in a disdainful smile, but before he could respond, a young woman stood up, holding her phone. "I've recorded everything," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "If you don't stop, this will go viral, and your career will be over." The cabin erupted into murmurs, many passengers raising their phones, some even live streaming the chaos. The pilot's eyes darted back and forth, looking at the phones pointed at him. "You think you can threaten me?" he shouted, but his voice lacked the earlier conviction. "Enough!" A commanding voice came from behind. It was the head flight attendant, flanked by two of her colleagues. "Pilot, get back to the cockpit now, or we'll be forced to restrain you." The pilot hesitated, clenching his fists before loosening them. Clearly, he was weighing his options, but the support for Barron and the looming threat of public exposure left him with no way out. Finally, with a growl of frustration, he turned and stormed off, slamming the door behind him. A wave of relief swept through the cabin, but the tension remained. The elderly man turned to Barron, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did well, son," he said warmly. "Don't let people like him affect you." Barron nodded, gratitude evident in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, his voice steady, though turmoil churned within. The flight continued, and the passengers around Barron became even more supportive, offering words of encouragement. The young woman who had recorded the incident uploaded the video online, and within minutes, the story had gone viral. News outlets quickly picked it up, and hashtags like #StandWithBarron and #JusticeIntheskis began trending worldwide. As the plane touched down, a crowd of reporters and supporters had already gathered at the airport. When Barron stepped off the plane, he was greeted with thunderous applause and cheers. The elderly man walked beside him, a steady pillar of support. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Barron, do you have anything to say about what happened on the flight?" Barron paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice deep but resolute. "This is about standing up against injustice, no matter where it happens. No one deserves to be treated that way. We're all on the same side." The crowd erupted into applause. Barron and the elderly man continued walking, the world watching, inspired by their courage and resilience. That evening, in his hotel room, Barron sat scrolling through a flood of supportive messages. He knew the fight against discrimination and injustice was far from over, but this was a step in the right direction. And as he closed his eyes, a profound thought flooded his mind. Sometimes, the most unexpected battles lead to the most meaningful victories, and in those moments, standing up, no matter how difficult, can change the world. This story is a powerful reminder of the strength found in courage and resilience when confronted with injustice. If you were in Barron's position, how would you respond to threats and unfair treatment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might inspire others and help drive meaningful change. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and loved ones. Together, we can spread the message of courage and unity far and wide. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.